Hello and welcome back to another episode of our One More Glass of Wine podcast. Today, we are joined by our COO and winemaker, Mark Roux. Mark, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's good to be back.
Hey, I know last time our viewers really enjoyed listening to you. Our listeners really enjoyed listening to you. You had a lot of great insights. We're sitting in the beautiful barrel room. Sorry, we've moved you a little bit out of your comfort zone. But this new setup, I think it's stunning. We're getting really good clarity. And I think the people really want to be able to hear exactly what you're saying.
Oh, well, it's always nice to share something what we do behind the scenes. A lot of people miss what we do behind the scenes. And for venue, actually sitting here is not a bad thing because this is actually where our product ends. So it is also an exciting part of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some layers and layers and layers of pallets and bottles of wine sitting here behind us. I mean, many vintages are lying in here. How many bottles, give or take, do you think are lying right behind us here?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure what's lying
We're not
behind
even
us.
going to guess.
But I mean, you make it sound like it's unnecessary. It's definitely all necessary.
No, it's very necessary.
Having wine unlabeled and aging is a very important part of wine before releasing. And I think most of our more of our premium reds, we like to leave at least 12 to 18 months in the bottle before we even look at releasing the wine. So it does tend to build up and more than what you think, actually.
Okay, so actually an incredibly important part of winemaking is sitting right to our right and left here. Hey?
Yeah, critical, because if you release a wine too early, you're missing the true colors of what that wine could be, and you're purely buying the wine on a label and tasting it because of the label. You're actually missing the real pleasure of the product, and that's what we really want to get out, is what's inside the bottle.
Yeah, 100%. That still earmark of quality. I love that we're sitting there with that. Speaking of quality and speaking of wines and our amazing wines, we've got an impeccable wine to drink today. This is something really special here, the Gem 2014 vintage.
I'm glad you're excited. It's always fascinating to open a bottle of Gem and always explain the story and taste it, and just always try and break it open and sort of try and explain what we do, why we blend it, what's important with the Gem. Because I think we ourselves are always trying to discover what we want to get out of the Gem, how we want to create it. It continually redefines itself. It's difficult. And I think when people also ask me, what is the Gem supposed to taste like? It's so difficult for me to answer that question. I said, Gem just tastes like Gem because it's so unique. It's about just understanding the farm, the place. And if you understand that, it'll make sense.
Cool.
So we'll try and break it down as best as possible.
Fantastic. Well, could you break open this bottle for us then, please?
I'm going to try my best.
You try your best. So I love how you touched on, it tastes like the Gem. I really think that what you've kind of touched on there and started to explain to the audience here is something that we like to refer to our wines. We call it fine wine. Yeah. So give us a breach into what's fine wine. What's the definition there?
Yeah, so if fine wine is really, I think as soon as you start reaching a level of quality, and I think fine wine is probably the best example of creating a wine with a sense of place. Fine wine, I think, is made extremely naturally. It really defines a sense of place. And I think with that, you capture the essence of pureness, of quality, clarity. And a fine wine is not just about boldness. It's about a wine it can just answer everything when you taste it. You can just taste it. It's so difficult to explain it now that you've put me on the spot.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I've heard people referring to fine wine as a wine that you taste and it transports you back to the place of its origin. So what I'm expecting almost to taste when I open a bottle of Gem is a little bit of the Helderberg, a little bit of the Waterford flair, the Mark Roux touch, the team here that always has a hand on how we make our wines, everything encapsulated in that bottle.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's quite specific to Waterford, but I think just looking a little bit bigger, getting a bit outside the box. It also needs to tick the box for me as a South African wine. For me, looking at South Africa, there's so much diversity. We've got everything in our country. There's mountains, there's low-lying areas, soils. Even geologists struggle to really put names to the soil structures that we have on our farm. The climate we've got from the tropics, we've got snow caps, and then we've got desert, and we've got the fynbos. So I think for me, the first sense of South African in a wine is it's a blend. It's a blend of multiple varietals. It's got diversity within it. And I think when you taste the gem, you don't pick any one thing out immediately. It doesn't just stand out as an incredible fine wine Cabernet. It actually, you can taste there's Cabernet, but it doesn't really jump out the glass. You can taste the other things going on there. And I think that's exactly what South Africa is about. But going deeper than that, you talk about Helderberg. I think it screams Helderberg as well. It's truly sort of characteristic of the Helderberg mountain. You get that sort of real fresh backbone, which I find on the Helderberg being closest to the ocean.
Okay.
You know, the ocean really brings in freshness into our grapes. We are north facing, so it's very, very warm, very hot. So you get sort of the most amount of richness and ripeness out of that as well. So you're getting intensity, you're getting those deep, rich tannins, you're getting ripeness. But because this also starts early on in the season, we also generally pick quite early. So we don't tend to get very high alcohol levels. So it's a dynamic of getting a cool wine with good freshness, a lot of intensity and richness, but we don't get the alcohol because we're picking before the real heat. So that you're all getting from our sense of place on the Helderberg from Waterford. Earthiness is a very strong characteristic on the Helderberg, that strong sort of graphite, the stony feel that you get in our wines. We're not fruit bombs. We don't have excessive clay in our swale. There's some clay, but not excessive clay. So, yeah.
Okay.
I've answered some of the questions.
Yeah, well, no, I just think it's so interesting how everything has an incredibly profound effect on how the wine actually comes out and how our place is such an important part on that. So I just want to talk a little bit about harvest and how we actually build up towards growing the quality grapes. I mean, you can't make great wine without growing great grapes. So how do we start our season? When does season start? Let's walk through the whole harvest kind of timeline.
Yeah, so vineyards, you know, I think a lot of people think a harvest is sort of considered in 1 year, one vintage, and vineyards actually work in at least a 3-year cycle. So what's happening this year is actually going to affect the 2026 vintage. So we don't really understand that until you think back and you realize, gee, 3 years ago was serious drought. That's why we've got a very low crop this year, maybe. Just as an example, I'm just saying it out
interesting,
there.
okay.
So there are 3 years of a bud that's busy growing. So what I'm saying is the bud that's going to shoot the vine that gives the grapes for 2026 is already being established this year.
Wow.
So it's actually, we're already creating those vintages ahead of time. So we need to consider that. So if we have, let's say, fires or anything, that's going to affect next year's harvest and the year after. But obviously the current vintage is the most influential. So David outside in the vineyards would start sort of pruning, looking at end of July, August at pruning. And this is really the start of harvest. I could even take it a little bit further back, actually. So from the end of the previous vintage, as soon as you harvest the previous vintage's grapes, it's very important to actually build a reserve for your next harvest. So as soon as you've picked your grapes, you want to get your vines almost growing again, get those leaves active so that they can start photosynthesizing and generating reserves for the roots before going into winter. Because as soon as it gets too cold, then you're not generating any roots. Because when your vines start budding after pruning, there needs to be energy, and the energy can only come from the roots because you don't have leaves to generate growth.
Okay, I see.
So
wow, it's got such a roll-on effect. You actually have to be so attentive.
It's not just right now. It's about years and years, and that's why, you know, vineyards are really, it's consistency. It's what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's no one action that's going to make you an incredible wine. It's about every day's dedication, every day,
consistency
every year.
And looking after everything.
Yes. So the actual year, it's 8 months of what you're doing in the vineyards. So it stretches it out a lot in the vineyards. Things happen a little bit quicker in the cellar because fermentation's a lot quicker and things move a lot faster. So that's why our hours are a lot longer for about 3-4 months of the year.
Yeah, I've seen you guys work really, really hard burning the midnight oil as well. And when we're now growing, the grapes are growing, we're actually looking at end of December coming into January. Are you already looking at certain blocks, certain vineyards, certain varietals and going, oh, we're going to put that in this vintage coming up with the gem? You've already looked at the previous winter, how the summer's shaping up. You already kind of have an idea of what's going on?
Yeah, I think that's always sitting on the back of your mind of how we're going to attack this year's blend, because I suppose I have a methodical process of blending, but I mean the result's always different. So anyone's got an equal chance every year, and it's relatively blind. So I'm not very I'm not favoriting any one vineyard. So December is a very good point of judgment, in a sense that your vineyards are almost fully grown, in the sense of the length of your shoots. You stop growing vegetatively, so basically your leaves and things stop growing, and actually the concentration starts moving towards the bunches. So you get an understanding of density of your canopy, how healthy your canopy is. Also, by then your bunches are pretty well formed, and you can see the size of the berries. Nothing much changes from then onwards, so you get a very good estimation of crop size, how much you're carrying, what it looks like. So already, looking at this year's vintage Cabernet Franc from the beginning was just looking amazing. And in the cellar currently, the Cab Franc's almost finished with fermentation, and it is positively very good. So,
Have you seen Cabernet Franc looking this good in previous years?
I'm really trying. I don't think I've ever seen it look this good, to be really honest.
That's
I think
really
probably
exciting.
in 14 years, this must be the best.
Oh, wow. That's really exciting.
I'm not quite sure how much attention I was paying my first 2 years of what the Cab Franc looked like, but I mean, let's call it 12 years. It's definitely looking the best. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So let's talk about this this vintage here. We're on 2014 drinking in this glass. Obviously, Cabernet is its backbone. We always sit with Cabernet as the backbone of the gem. And then I've heard you say we layer other varietals on there. So talk us through the backbone and the layering process.
Yeah, so looking at the gem, the idea is if we look at the label, it's really a simple photograph of the entrance of a winery with the vineyards in the background. And I think when you talk about fine wine being a sense of place, the label sort of shouts out, this is a wine from this building and these vineyards behind me. So when you say we want it to be Cabernet and then layered, it's not because we wanted that. It's because what we felt the building and the vineyards behind it actually chose that blend. So our vineyards are by far preferred to Cabernet Sauvignon. Our soils are just suited to Cabernet Sauvignon. So that has formed the backbone of what the gem is. And because we understand that, and because we know that's our leading varietal that we pick. And then from there, to create the gem, a fine wine needs to be fine in every essence, from balance and flavor and fruit and spice. It needs to all just make sense. It just needs to fall into place. So by building that, I always feel, if I create the best possible wine with the components I have in front of me from this farm, we're going to naturally make an incredible fine wine from these properties, and we will naturally get a blend of 7, 8, 9 varietals. So I'm never pushing to get 8 or 9 varietals. That's what it takes.
Just lands up becoming that.
Yeah, that's what it takes to create that, to fill all those blocks to get the fine wine in it. So Cabernet is where I start. I form the base. It's the most important blend. Even though it's just one varietal, it's still sort of a blend and a sort of a put together. And then from there, it's filling in those gaps. And so we're taking it from a super premium wine into a fine wine class. And that's what we're creating.
That's incredible. That is incredible. So does vintage specific, obviously, I mean, some years are warmer, some years are colder. How does that affect what you're going to put into the gem?
Yeah, so again, it does sit a little bit on the back of my mind when we are warmer. So what I've sort of learned, especially about 6 weeks before picking, I think that those weather conditions are extremely influential on what the grape or the wine's going to end up like. So we pick Chardonnay generally at the end of January. So I know the latter end of December, if that's extremely hot, I'm concerned for acidity in Chardonnay. And then if I'm looking at January, if that's extremely warm, then I'm starting to get concerned for acidity and freshness in the early ripening reds, and this going on for the others as well. So I think that period, sort of 4 to 6 weeks prior to picking, is very important and very crucial for me to sort of get an earmark of where those varietals are going to swing, whether fresh or not. So, but when it comes to blending, we've got such an amazing sort of set of tools through these varietals. We've got especially the Italian varietals, which have an amazing acidity level and freshness, regardless of if it's a super hot vintage. They're always going to bring freshness. They're always going to bring brightness and lightness. So they're always going to be there, whether it's a hot or cool vintage. And then if you're looking for maybe more dryness, if a warm again, it takes away that real classical tannin structure, the dryness, the pencil shaving, some of that old classical feel that you get on a red wine. So those tools are there. Cab Franc brings in a lot of that dryness, a lot of freshness as well. So Cabernet doesn't always like to get too much heat. So the tools are there. The tools are there, and you can use them. And again, it's just looking at the tools in front of you and creating a wine that it just is a fine wine. So.
Oh, fantastic. So what I'm hearing is there's going to be a decent percentage of Cabernet Franc in the 23 vintage of the gem.
I think so. Well, listen here, when one single varietal really stands out as a completeness, that alone generally builds up its percentage in the blend, because it's not just adding its necessity to the blend, it's also adding so much purity and power because it's just such a good wine. So if Cab Franc's really good, I tend to find it does push it up by another 4 or 5% than what I would have normally used it. Or Shiraz is really good, it goes up by about 4 or 5%. If another varietal maybe not as performing, it comes down. So that works itself out a little bit.
It's a very fluid kind of winemaking ideal.
Very fair.
Okay, well, let's actually talk about what's in the glass. What are we tasting? What are we smelling? How does the structure of the wine? What are you noting here most?
Yeah, so this is the 2014 that you've pulled out for us to taste. What I remember from 2014, just going back to a lot of what we've been talking about now, is it was a relatively warm vintage, but I mean a really good wet winter before. So vineyards were extremely happy. They pushed out a lot of fruit, and there was a lot of good weather during summer to really get that growth happening. So it pushed out a lot of leaves. There was a lot of energy. The factory was big. It could look after all the fruit. So it was a big vintage for one. But also a warm vintage. So again, a vintage that has a lot of, I think, expressiveness. There's a lot of sort of softness. I think the one word that really sticks in my mind about the 2014 vintage, and I think I've had the same comment on many red wines from this vintage, is almost velvety. Like I find the tannin structure of 2014 wines, it's got that soft velvetiness, very luxurious. I think aromatic wise, it's got a lot of spice. I think there's a lot of sort of that cinnamon, the rich red fruit. It almost, I'd love to know exactly how much Sangiovese we blended in here, because I've got a feeling there was quite a bit of Sanjo. I've got that Sanjo sort of cinnamon red fruit spice that's sticking out. Maybe also now that it's aged a little bit, that the Sanjo is really pulling this wine or keeping it going a little bit further. So
very cool. So correct me if I'm wrong here. This is around about your first vintage of having your kind of stamp on the Waterford wines, isn't it?
So this is actually my very first gem that I produced.
I'm so glad we pulled out the 2014 vintage.
Yeah, by myself, yes. So this is my first gem that I produced as sort of head winemaker.
Oh, very cool. Well, let's jump in a time machine. Take us back to 2014 Marc Roux. How's it being in the cellar? How is it putting this wine together? Lots of pressure?
It was, I think, but I mean, it also gave you a little bit of extra oomph, a little bit of extra energy, a few more extra hours. It took an extra 2 months to make the blend.
Well, I mean, I must admit, we're going to jump ahead. You've nailed it. This is a beautiful wine.
Yeah, so you do sort of overthink yourself. You throw every option out there, and at some point you also need to commit, which I think is really difficult. So, but I mean, it was a great vintage. It was a big vintage, so it was a hard-working vintage. But I mean, it had a good team that year as well, so that did help. And yeah, just glad it made it work. And so,
well, I definitely think your hand is from a very beginning of your wine industry. You've been very talented. I think you've always made incredible wines. Are you seeing your crafting of the gem blend getting better and better as you go on?
I think yes. I think so. I think obviously so.
Yeah. You become a bit more experienced.
Yeah. So I think in the wine industry, I think you can't underestimate what experience does, because every year is so different. And as we were chatting earlier, vineyards are working in a 3-4 year cycle. So, only once you've gone past one cycle in a vineyard can you only really start understanding what's going on. And I think I look at a wine, we're tasting the 2014, my first gem. So it's taken a long time to learn the results. And only now that this wine is 10 years old, can I make adjustments and think, maybe we need a little more of this. And now it's another 10 years before I really see what that adjustment's doing. So it's a very slow process, very slow learning curve. And I think you just learn every day, and you just, I suppose, just be humble and just try and look at it every day and just do small adjustments. That's also something that I've learned in the wine industry. Don't try and shape the world in one day. Just do little things at a time, and just keep tweaking it.
Cool. So, I mean, this wine's quite a romantic wine. It's a wine you pull out at special occasions. When have you pulled the gem out that you would go, that there is an occasion that we nailed to drink this wine in?
You say a special occasion. I've actually pulled it out, not even on my birthday, just on a normal weekday sometimes. But I realize I am spoiled. I'm trying to think of some special occasion. I've opened it, I think, at numerous birthday parties or birthdays of really good friends of mine, of my parents.
What a spoil, hey?
Yeah, so it's always, I think, memorable. And I think that's a lot of what your good bottles of wine for, is sharing it with people that matter in your life. And I think that's why good wine is there, is to share and to open. Why do you want to store it forever and ever? Yes, you should store it, and you should look after it, because that is exciting. But I mean, it's also there to be consumed, and that's part of the enjoyment. That's the other half of the enjoyment. So
for sure.
I'll think of another one just now.
No, that's cool. I got one more question for you, Mark. If you could drink a bottle of gem with anyone in history, who would you pull this bottle of gem out for? Anyone whatsoever. A winemaker that you're going, that's the guy I'd love to sit down and have a glass of wine with. A sports person, an artist, anyone. Who could you pull this bottle of gem out for?
Jeepers, now I'm trying to think. I suppose it would be just fun to open it with maybe a really famous sports star, or a president, or like what. But sure. I think probably being a little bit more selfish, I would look at someone that's maybe really been an icon in the wine industry, because I'd ask them for comments.
For sure. What do you think of the wine?
Yeah, that's more what I'd be wanting to get out of them, and sort of learn from them. And I can't think of the names right now, but I mean, I suppose
well, I mean, I love how you say you'd want to drink it with someone who could almost critique your work. I think it shows that you're always trying to get better. You're always trying to improve. That's that's amazing.
Well, it's also to improve, but it's also nice to hear what other people in the world, they're making fine wines in their country. Old guy that makes Tignanello, I can't think of his name now, but anyway, they're making fine wines in their country, and they have their vision, and they're doing the best of what they can in their property, their identity, exactly what we're doing here. So I would like to hear how do they think of someone else's fine wine from their country. So
for sure, that's incredible. Mark, so tell us, what's your favorite part about harvest season?
Harvest season, to be really honest, it's actually just before harvest starts. It's almost December holidays, so
before the storm,
everyone's gone, and I like to hang around the cellar, around the vineyards. So it's actually generally walking around the vineyards with family and sort of trying to suss out where the vintage is going, what are we looking like, who are we going to pick first, who's going to be picked last. So it's more like a casual, relaxed time of walking through the cellar, because the vineyards. Because once harvest starts, the walking through the vineyards becomes very quick, very rushed. And so I think that's a very nice, relaxed time of the harvest season.
Cool. So teamwork is obviously incredibly important in anything that you're doing. How important is your team working together in the cellar, and how does that translate to how these grapes work together, these varietals work together as a team in the gem?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, because no one person can make all the wine by himself. So it's definitely a collaborative. one person needs to hold that one side of the hose, the other guy needs to be on the other side holding the tank, the one needs to be on the top of the tank. So it's the collective together that makes the wine work. And I think this also relates to the blend and the varietals. You know, it's everyone complementing each other. And I suppose there is a bit of a hierarchiness. You've got sort of different levels. You've got people that have been in the cellar for 10 years, and then you've got your interns that have literally just walked in. But I mean, we're all equally important. We all have a role to play, and at the end of the day, we're making incredible fine wine, and we're all important.
Alrighty, so the gem is a collectible. It is a collector's item. How do you recommend people store it? Why should people collect this wine?
Yeah, so the gem, I think, it's an iconic wine. It's the first of its kind to be a blend of 8 different varietals. And not just locally in South Africa, but I mean internationally as well. Taking this wine overseas, abroad, to the States, to Europe, we are blending varietals that no other country in the world even thought of doing. So the uniqueness alone is something worth storing and showcasing and just having it in your cellar to showcase to people of something that's incredibly unique that's coming from South Africa. I think another point is South Africa's, I think, turning out some really, really top quality wines at the moment. And I would like to say that the gem is definitely in the top list of showcasing South African fine wine. So.
You've got an incredible assistant, Jamie. What's it like working alongside with her?
She keeps me sane.
Keeps you sane?
I can be incredibly difficult, and I think she can also be. So I think we help each other not to be so stubborn, especially with everyone else we work with. She's incredible, and she's actually just become a mother a few months ago. So she's been away from the cellar for about 4 or 5 months, but rolled in January just before harvest and steamrolled as if she hasn't left. So it's been amazing. Incredible. She's come out firing, and I was semi-prepping for a half-day job that she wanted, but I mean, she's really come out and she's enthusiastic, and it's almost like she's reborn and wants to really get stuck in. So it's been great. She's super hardworking, dedicated. She's really wants to get things accurate and right, and I think we complement each other and help each other out tremendously, which is great working with her.
I think it's so important to work so well with someone who works so in line with what you're doing, someone you can trust and everything like that. I mean, I saw her the other day jumping into a tank to shovel it out. I think that's incredible. She doesn't mind getting her hands and feet dirty. Hey?
Yeah, and you don't even have to ask her. She's already halfway in before you're trying to find someone who's going in. So sometimes we have to fight, who's going to get in first. So,
that is so cool.
Because I also enjoy doing it, but
sometimes she's just in first.
True. Yeah, no, she's great. I can't ask for anyone better to sort of help me out.
Well, Mark, thank you for the chat. Thank you for joining us on the podcast again. I'm so glad that we got to open up this wine and also your first vintage, and to be able to drink this particular vintage on the podcast with you. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jeremy. It was nice sharing it with you.
Thank you for coming.